Let's break down the 3 trades that we had taken today. One of those trades were this morning in pre-market on QQQ. I took NQ futures short. Really great setup. We talked a little bit about it this morning, but I'll definitely break that back down as far as my reasonings for taking that trade, how I locked in about $900 before the market opened. We had a nice QQQ trade here today as well for a small 422. And then I took another little trade over on ES for a quick little scalp. That was a good trade as well. So I'll break those 3 down step by step, where my head was leading up to the trade, what I saw while I executed, why I managed the trade the way I did, just for you guys to be able to learn from those trades and be able to take this and apply this and start to see some good trades like this yourself. All right, so let's start with the Qs first. Again, I took this trade here in pre-market over on NQ. All right, and so basically what we had, it was very simple trade, guys. We had the bottom end of that daily gap at 474.25, and we know that when we're coming up into a gap, like we're coming up into a gap and there's a gap overhead, we know that the bottom end of that gap likes to be respected as pretty key resistance until we break through it and then hold it for the possible gap fill long, right? So I know that as we're coming up into this gap level, the bottom end of the gap, it's more or less going to be initial resistance until we actually break it and truly see it hold support, right? And then on top of that, we had a very, very key daily zone of resistance that was right in line with the bottom end of that daily gap. And that key zone of resistance that we had was between 473.86 to 474.26. Okay, so I know we have a lot of resistance overhead, and I like the formation that the Qs was forming, along this way up. So when I take a step back and I look at the bigger picture, I'm like, okay, well, I know we have a lot of resistance right around that 474.25, but what are we doing leading up into that level of resistance? Is there any kind of recognizable setup? Is there anything else that I see that suggests maybe a long, maybe a short, right? So when I zoom out, I see that we're also grinding an uptrend that was created from yesterday's low of day. We came back down and hit it again here in pre-market, right? Came back up to that zone of resistance. We dropped, came back in to that zone of resistance. We hit it. We start to drop, and I'm starting to see a great short opportunity. Why is that? Because I know when a stock comes off a trend line, puts in a higher high, comes back down to a trend line and bounces, and then creates a lower high, ideally off key resistance, I know 80% of the time we see a lower high formation and we get a crack of that trend line. We then go from the bullish side to the bearish side of that trend line. And I know there's an 80% chance we see that take place, especially when that lower high is forming off a key level of resistance. In this case, it was a key daily level of resistance, and it was the lower end of that daily gap. So another barrier of resistance. So I'm liking what I'm seeing here. And so as we come back up into that level of resistance and we see that rejection and we just can't break above it, I start to see the start of a lower high off resistance where I'm expecting to come into the trend line and then eventually crack that trend line and fade and fall a little bit more. So that's exactly where I took my trade here this morning, was when we came back up into that key level of resistance and we saw that we were just getting rejected. We couldn't break through it. So I got short and I rode this into the trend line. And I'm sitting back waiting to see, can we crack that trend line, or are we going to bounce off the trend line? So as we came down to the trend line, we tapped it several times, and it looked as if we were going to put in another higher low off that trend line and possibly push back to the upside. So that's, right around where I got out, and I was scaling out of that trade as I noticed it's just not getting that strong crack through the trend line that I would like to see. So I was in right up against resistance, stops right above it, and I was looking for the crack and the follow through that trend line, but as I noticed price was holding above it, I really didn't feel confident at that point in time to continue to hold it when I was already up pretty nice in profit. So I trailed my stop losses down nice and tight over the current bid ask, and eventually I did get clipped, and then it flushed and cracked through the trend line. In hindsight, it could have been a $3,000 trade. But in the moment, I see something that doesn't validate we're going to get that continuation move in my favor to the downside. I see buyers stepping in. I see support being created off that trend line. And in the moment, I start to say there's a higher probability chance that we bounce here now at this point in time versus crack. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and cut that trade and take the profits that I have because I'm happy with the profits that I have. So that was the first trade here on the Qs this morning. I took 2 NQ contracts short. NQ is futures. And I was able to lock in about $900 on that trade. And it was a very, very simple setup. We broke through all that resistance. We got back below it, simply put in a lower high of all of that resistance. And my game plan was catching the short for a lower high crack of the trend line. But I eventually took profit at the trend line again because we just weren't able to get through it. Nice little base hit profit there. Tight stops. Pretty good reward. So very happy with that trade this morning. Then coming into the day, we did have a QQQ trade on the options account as well. We got about 422 on that trade. And this was a simple dip buy. Okay, so it was a 2-minute scalp. I was in and out within a total of 2 minutes. And so what I noticed is we're starting to dump pretty hard and pretty heavy off high a day, right? A little bit of this head and shoulders formation, right? Plays on out. We're dropping off very hard, very heavy, right? We literally went from 475 and we're dumping within 4 minutes down to 472.50. That's a $2.50 drop in less than 5 minutes. That's a pretty big move. We are starting to become pretty overextended to the downside into key resistance. What was key resistance here? I'm sorry, key support. What was key support on the Qs? It was monthly hedge pressure and weekly hedge pressure, both sitting at 472.50. So the criteria for a dip buy is being met. And what's the initial criteria for a dip buy? Is that we're selling off hard and heavy into a valid key level of support. And we are overextended into that valid key level of support, and we don't see any kind of bounce until we get to that valid key level of support. That's the criteria that needs to be met for a dip buy. We're not slowly fading and falling on down to that level. We are dumping straight down into that level. That's the main piece of criteria that needs to be met for a valid dip buy. We got to be coming straight down into that level, not slowly fading into it. Okay, so I'm pretty confident that we are overextended to the downside into very key support, weekly hedge pressure and monthly hedge pressure. So my game plan is the second we hit 472.50, I'm going to take that trade expecting a dip buy, expecting a reaction to the upside, 50 cents, maybe $1. And my stops are just right below that level, right? Just right below it. I usually risk about 25, 30 cents. That's my standard risk when I'm trading the Qs or the SPY. And that standard risk is plenty for a dip buy. Because if that thing drops below 472.50 by more than 25, 30 cents, it's most likely going to keep dropping on off. So I want to get out quick for a small paper cut loss. But I know that if we get that bounce, the bounces are quick, the bounces are fast, and they could be sizable pops. We caught about $1 pop within 2 minutes there on the Qs. And that's how we were able to get 422 on that trade in as little as 2 minutes for a simple dip buy opportunity there on QQQ. And then I did take one last trade, and that was here on the SPY, and I took ES on that trade. And that was the trade that we planned out. We mapped it out. We talked about, hey, we have some really good opportunity for a nice trade down around some of these lower levels. And so why were those lower levels valid here on the SPY? Well, number one, we had this key area of resistance on the SPY between 547.09 to 547.45, right? Thursday's high a day, we got rejected. It was a big rejection. Last Friday's high a day, we hit it, big rejection. Here Monday, high a day, we hit that region, big rejection. Same thing Tuesday. We come up into all of that resistance that was created from the previous 3 highs of day. We hit it again for the 4th time on Tuesday. We get rejected. So I know that this is some pretty key, pretty significant resistance. And when we break through resistance and come back down into it, what does it turn? Strong support. So strong resistance, I'm looking to turn strong support for a bounce off that level, since this is the first time that we're actually coming back down to retest that previous level of resistance as possible support. So that's number one. And then number two, we had this little teeny weeny gap between Tuesday's high of day and yesterday's low of day, a very teeny gap. Now, would I have taken this trade just inside the gap? Ideally not. Most of the time, no, because I think we got, pretty much to that gap level. We pretty much filled it. We were really close to hitting that gap level yesterday before that big rip to the upside. So just getting in because we're coming into that little gap wasn't enough for me. But then I noticed, hey, not only do we have this teeny weeny little gap, but we also have a strong previous level of resistance that I know can turn into strong support, and we could still see that light gap fill bounce. So I'm looking to get in within that region where those 2 points intersect. So where do those two zones intersect? Right here at 475.45, where you have the top end of that zone, and that's right in the middle of that gap. So I'm planning on getting in as we come down into those two support levels, expecting to see a bounce, expecting to see something take place, and then simply put stops below all of that support just in case we don't see the bounce. So as we're coming down into that region, we're falling hard, we're falling hard, we're falling hard, and then guess what? We stop falling, right? Seller step in, push it down, buyer say, yep, nope, push it back up. And look at where that 1 minute candle closed. It closed right at that midpoint, the area where I wanted to get in. And we had decent price action where a buyer stepped in and pushed it back up. So we never closed and never fell below that key level of support. So I took the trade right there, stops under that previous 1 minute candle, and I'm looking for some kind of a reaction to the upside. And did we get that immediate reaction? We did. And I trailed my stops up nice and tight because the way I was looking at this is another little dip buy opportunity. I'm not expecting a true reversal. We are in a strong downtrend on the SPY. Sellers are clearly in control right now at this point in time. And as I'm looking to get in here for an entry, this is not a reversal entry because we have no clear signs of actually seeing a reversal. So I'm more thinking around the lines of a dip buy. Get in at that key support level, scalp it up really quick. And if we get follow through, great. We get follow through. So I can trail my stop on up if we get some follow through and truly see a reversal from downtrend to uptrend. But if we don't, I want to be in position correctly to lock in my profits on a quick dip buy, a quick scalp. And that's what it was. It was a quick dip buy. It was a quick scalp. We didn't put in that higher low. We didn't get that higher high. There was no clear sign of a reversal. So I took my profits for a small, like $300. So 3 winning trades today. It was a great day, and every single trade, as always, is an A+ setup with multiple confluences and multiple reasons to take it. So really good day in the market, from the first trade being on the Qs and pre-market to the second trade being a nice dip buy and the third trade being a nice dip buy. We have a really, really good profitable day, and I'm already like 2x my daily goal in just one day. I mean, what a great way to start the month, coming on in, market giving us like killer opportunity, setting up properly, and we're able to bang out some nice base hits that in turn turn into a really, really nice home run day. I mean, between the two accounts, I'm up a little over $1,600, and I like to make just $500 a day consistently. So I have 2 to 3x that daily goal on just 3 proper A+ trades, and it was a simple day.